They will be competing in the NL wildcard race, potentially with the Pirates and the Brewers, who are currently atop the NL Central. I think a lot of people believe that the Cubs are ultimately the favorite to win that division, but the Pirates are 5-0 right now. They have had a nice schedule to start, facing off against the Marlins and the Nationals, but still a 5-0 start for a team that really is trying to start to make their way towards contending. They didn't make the splashiest of moves this offseason, but they did round out their roster, and they do have a young core forming. Do you buy the hype at all with the Pirates right now?
A little bit. I do because, they got off to a really hot start last year. So they're going to learn from the fact that they fell off rather precipitously. And we talked about in our early preseason kind of predictions about which teams had the best offseason. And the Pirates were kind of, sneaky good. They really invested in the roster. In addition to the Mitch Keller extension, they brought in a ton of big league guys. Now you're probably just throwing something at the wall, hoping something sticks. But so far that has worked. I have a buddy that was down watching an Indianapolis Indians game, and there are a couple names that are on that roster that you can look and say, hey, that could impact the 2024 big league squad as well. So they've got some names, Paul Skeens, of course, being one of them, the first overall pick in the 2023 MLB draft, that's going to allow them to increase their depth as guys start to fall off or struggle or get hurt. So it's kind of for that reason, I think the Pirates have enough of the boxes checked off to say, you know what, I think this could be sustainable for them.
Yeah, they when you get Skeens in the fold, that rotation's going to look a lot better. Right now, at least they have some decent names there where it's not there's not a day where I'm looking at it and say, okay, who are they running out there? They added Martin Perez and Marco Gonzalez, a couple of veteran lefties this offseason. Jared Jones looked pretty decent in his debut. Mitch Keller got the extension. So the rotation's in a pretty good spot. And when you get Skeens to put atop it with Keller, all of a sudden, I look at their pitching and say, all right, maybe this Pirates team can do something. You did reference, though, that rough start last year, and I want to go through those numbers real quick. Last year, they started the season 20-8. They then lost 7 in a row in 11 of 12. So they went from 20-8 to 21-19, and from 20-8 till the end of the year, they were 56-78. So that big drop-off last year has to be fresh in the minds of all these guys to not get too excited. And maybe that is the learning experience you need to then come into a following season and actually, be a little more consistent month over month.
Yeah, Derek Shelton's still a fairly new manager, so he's figuring some things out along the way as well. So learning from that experience last year. You also got to remember that, despite that good start, they did it without O'Neal Cruz, which would have been a much bigger factor later on when they did start to fall off. So now having him, batting leadoff, kind of doing that Aaron Judge thing. I mean, that's a potent lineup right at the top there for Pittsburgh. They really haven't had that much pop since, back in the early 90s when we were looking at Bobby Bonilla, Barry Bonds, Andy Van Slyke, to date myself as being an older guy there. So like Pittsburgh, I mean, if you're in the Steel City, you got to be feeling really good right now.
It's a great start. You did lose me a little bit with some of those names. I'm born in 95. So, I mean, I remember Bonds as a Giant. Bonilla, we're still paying him for the Mets. But yeah, the Pirates definitely have an interesting core right now, and it's getting better. And again, when they get Skeens in the mix, that's when they become interesting. To compare them to the Brewers, though, the Brewers started off 4-1. They swept the Mets. They then split their series against the Twins. They lost today, their first loss of the year. The Brewers are a team that was counted out this offseason. Everyone started looking at the Cubs. Everyone expects the Cardinals to default back to being the team that's always in contention in the Central. The Reds are the hot young team that everyone's looking at saying it's their time. But the Brewers have been the consistent team in this division as of late. And I got to watch them firsthand in that first series. They're playing great defense. They're quick. They're stealing bases. I got a lot of concerns about their pitching, but they're a good team, and I don't think we should count them out anymore. They very much can be in this playoff race all year.
Yeah, they're not doing what the Tampa Bay Rays have done because they still have some notable names. They went out and signed Rhys Hoskins, Christian Yelich, has had a nice little extension for himself. He's playing great. I think that's a big factor for their success, especially offensively. But the Brewers are kind of the National League version of Tampa, where I think we even said it before the season started. They're one of those clubs where, despite the fact you might not know who they plug and place at various positions, who's coming up through the minor league system other than, young superstar prospects like Jackson Churio, they're going to kind of figure out a couple things. And that's absolutely been the case for Milwaukee so far this season. So, they've got that injection of players that at a certain point now, you just have to give them respect and go, all right, I guess Abner Uribe is going to be the next big shutdown closer. He got some buzz about him last year. He's one of those guys, and it's not Craig Counsell running the show, but it is still a front office, and it's still a squad of guys that were around the likes of David Stearns and Craig Counsell for so many years.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about the Corbin Burnes trade, because you think about Burnes back on this team, and all of a sudden you'd say, man, I mean, are they clearly the best team in the Central? With that deal, I think DL Hall becomes this piece that is so important to the Brewers right now, because I go through the names in that rotation: Freddie Peralta, DL Hall, Colin Ray, Jacob Junis, and Joe Ross. DL Hall's the only guy outside of Peralta that I say, okay, that's a potential frontline starter, and he's coming back from being a relief pitcher in Baltimore the last couple of years, where he never really got that full chance to be in the rotation. Now he's got it. He's in the number 2 spot in that rotation. They need DL Hall to be great. And I think my one concern about the Brewers is, how many innings can you get from DL Hall? So are they going to wear down the stretch because they're just not going to have enough pitching to get through the whole season?
Yeah, their depth in the minors is good, but not great. Aaron Ashby is a player that has a couple years service time. Obviously, in the bigs, might be somewhat of a notable name. Wade Miley's on the IL right now. Trevor, don't call me Tyler McGill, also on the IL right now for the Brewers. So again, they've got some depth that can step up there, but it's certainly not the likes of someone like the Cubs that are, they've got a lot of options right there for their starting rotation. They even got a great start out of Javier Assad, their number 5 guy. So yeah, I think the starting pitching is kind of going to be, that area where they might struggle more than offensively. It's been the opposite in the past, right? But Freddie Peralta, Brendan Woodruff, Corbin Burnes, those are all guys that came up all around the same time, almost out of nowhere. I think they're going to need to try to find that pattern again, to have some more youth injected into the rotation if they really are going to be players in this NL Central.
And then what they do at the deadline is going to be so fascinating, especially with Willy Adames, because it's your last year with him. You're probably not going to be able to sign him. If you're in the mix, do you just keep him for that final run? We remember a couple years ago they traded Josh Hader with more than a year of control. So I just wonder how they're going to walk that tightrope with how they're managing winning now and winning into the future. It's a 1-week sample size, but if you had to pick today, and we're going to come back and check this for sure, April 3rd podcast, we're definitely going to follow up on this at the end of the season. Yeah, mark it down somewhere. Who are you picking to finish with a better record this year? And are either of these teams a playoff team, the Pirates or the Brewers?
I think one of them will be, and I think it'll be the Milwaukee Brewers. I plenty of folks like ourselves kind of discounted the Brewers, but there were a lot of projection systems out there that actually had the Brewers as the best team. So it goes back to that, Tampa Bay Rays of the National League concept. So I think the Brewers are going to be that team, right? They've got the proven, more recent MVP superstar in Christian Yelich that has found his way. Pirates have their own, and Andrew McCutchen, obviously on the wrong side of 30 now at this point in his career. But I think the Brewers, just as an organization, they just continue to do it season after season. They find different ways to get things done. I think they probably will end up dealing a guy like Willy Adames. They have to be smart like that. If you look at the big picture of everything that went down with the Josh Hader deal, I think it also allowed them to get Williams Contreras, right, as a catcher. So it did lead to bigger and better things for their future. So that's not a sacrifice you want to make if you're in the hunt. But I think the Brewers are going to find a way, one way or another. But it would be nice to see the Pirates in the hunt once again, right? It's been about a decade since they've been to the postseason.
Yeah, it would be. It's interesting that you mentioned, the Hader trade, how that led to something. And also, if you're thinking about the Burnes trade to give you DL Hall and Joey Ortiz could be the shortstop if you move Adames, and then maybe you trade Adames for a pitching prospect that you plug into your rotation in the second half, and you boost your rotation. Your lineup takes a hit, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, but more control. It'll be crazy to see how this team looks by the end of the season, because so much can happen. I also agree that the Brewers are the better team of the two and the more likely to make a run. My last question to you on these two teams, though, is if the Brewers make the playoffs, are you picking them to win the Central still?
Who I would pick them. I think the Cubs do have a better roster, but they've got a lot to overcome still, right? I mean, they really squandered an opportunity last year and just kind of stunk it up down the stretch, right? Their future was in their own hands right there, their destiny, and they squandered it. And so those things can linger for an organization sometimes, right? So Imanaga did really nice in his first start. A lot of swing and misses, 6 shutout innings. Actually had a no hitter at one point deep into that game against the Rockies. But I would still say that the money has to go on a team that has done it and that has proven, even with a different cast of characters, in the Brewers over somebody like the Cubs in the NL Central. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'd probably lean Cubs, but I'm not overly confident with it. I think the one thing I would say about it is I don't believe there's going to be multiple teams coming out of the Central. So I think if either makes it, it's got to be winning the division. I don't see both of them making it. And the Cardinals are still a team I have my eye on. The Reds I'm curious about. But I do believe right now the best two teams in the division are the Brewers and the Cubs. And I would go Cubs for the end of the season because I just think that things might change at some point, and I don't know if I trust the Brewers pitching enough.
Yeah, hard to argue with that logic. Yeah, it's nice to actually be able to talk about the NL Central and not force it of like, all right, well, let's be fair to all the divisions. NL Central is low key very exciting right now with all those young players. So it's nice to have that injection of excitement in that division.